What is going on, everybody? Hope you're doing well. Happy Wednesday. Jumping on here for just a couple minutes and talking through kind of part two of our frameworks that I wanted to share with you. So, just as if you weren't on our call yesterday, one of the things we talked about was these are conversations that we have had over the last couple of quarterly gatherings here in Austin, Texas. I wanted to kind of export some of those conversations and bring them into the Facebook group to add some value to you guys as leaders and to kind of show you some of the things that we're discussing, some of the things that we're talking about, which is really fun to be a part of. So yesterday we spent some time talking about the concept, the framework that we use of upper room, lower room, just looking at, the four P's of lower room: personality, place, programs, and people, and how really we're called to give people a vision for the upper room. And today we're going to spend some time talking about what we call funnel fusion. And it's a concept that we use, that we talked about this last week in Austin here, just talking about two different types of funnels. And so if you're not familiar with the term funnel, it's like a business term where you think about like a funnel as at the top you got your kind of your widest group, and then as you narrow down, less and less people or things are a part of that funnel, because it begins to constrict the further down the funnel that you go. And so we're talking about two different funnels. We're talking about what we call the assimilation funnel. We'll talk about that here for in a few minutes, and then we'll talk about the multiplication funnel. And really, where funnel fusion, the conversation gets pretty wild, is this idea of overlapping those funnels and actually beginning to utilize both of them. And so, if you remember, like even yesterday, our conversation around upper room, lower room, we're saying these are the realization that both of these things exist, but it's also giving people a picture for more. And that's what you're going to find in funnel fusion as well. As we're going to say, okay, there's parts of the assimilation funnel that are just a part of ministry, right? But if it's just assimilation funnel, there's going to be like a discontentment in us and a kind of a frustration of just really beginning to look at our ministries and the impact that ultimately that we're making. So let me do a quick screen share here with you, and I'll just walk through just a few minutes with you on this one. Hopefully it works. There we go. I think we're good. Good one there. Okay. So let's talk about the two different types of funnels. We'll talk about the assimilation funnel. We'll talk about the multiplication funnel, and really how these things come about, right? So on one side, what we're going to have is we're going to call the assimilation funnels. And funnel, we kind of think about like it constricting down and going down a little bit. And so on this is this idea of how do we assimilation, hopefully that's how you spell it. As you think about how do we continue to progress people down into more engagement. And the thing is like in ministry, what you're going to experience is that the more relationship, the more engagement, the more commitment that somebody has, obviously the less that we're going to be able to get people or immediately there. And the goal of any type of funnel like this is to progress them in an order. So you think about like a traditional assimilation funnel in the church is, so you think about like what we call top of funnel, and it's this idea of coming really to like worship, or like maybe like an event would be kind of your entry point of some type of engagement. So maybe they come to your midweek, or they come to Sunday morning, maybe an outreach event that you do. And so there's a sense of like, okay, that's kind of the first step for people, and helping them begin to know who you are, build a relationship with them, and to begin to help them moving forward. And you think about like the next step is really this idea of like connecting, right? So you move them from kind of this large space into a more of an intimate space, where they're beginning to build relationships with people. They're beginning to like maybe connect in a small group, a missional community. some type of like a smaller setting of 6, 12, 20 people, where really the goal of that is to really allow them to know, to be known, to continue to build those relationships. And so to move from kind of this like abstract person who's sitting on the outside to really beginning to build relationships. And then the last part of that assimilation funnel is really about like serving, right? So you want them to begin to use like their gifts in there, and so we want to continue to progress them. And what you find is that each step of the way, less and less people are inclined to begin to engage. And one of the things, if you read the book where we got this from, is Future Church. What they say is, in variations, if you have 100% in kind of the top, you're going to have probably about 50% that is ultimately going to connect. And then ultimately you're going to have a 25-ish or so percent that's going to ultimately get into kind of that bottom of that funnel. And so really it's this idea of like, okay, how do we begin to pull people closer into relationships using their gifts? And that's a part of assimilation funnel. And so all of us have some type of funnel like that, right? So we think about like, okay, what's the entry point where we're trying to meet people? What's the kind of that first step? Then what's that kind of that next step? And then ultimately we're moving in. And each step of the way is you're going to find less and less people. In fact, what the book talks about is the 150-25 rule is you're going to have like slight variations in that, but it's going to be an outlier if you are able to kind of crack that in a deeper way. So that's the assimilation funnel. The other one is this idea that the scripture talks about, which is the multiplication funnel. And we're going to go on the multiplication funnel, we're going to go the other way. And so on the multiplication funnel, it's really like this heart where what they call the one, and the one where they really begin to be captured by what we talked about yesterday, like was this like vision for disciple making, the vision for kingdom impact that can be bigger, honestly, than like a local church or even some of the programs of the church, where they just begin to say, man, I really believe God has called me to something, called me to make disciples, called to engage the community. And so really the kind of the front side of this funnel that goes the other direction is really kind of a heart for multiplication and disciple making, right? And so they really begin to kind of be inspired of saying, man, I want to have kingdom impact. So we start with giving them and helping them capture this idea of a heart for multiplication and disciple making. And then ultimately we want that impact to spread, right? So they're actually beginning to influence more people and more impact that's happening, where you begin to move them into really this idea of equipping and learning, where they're beginning to move into this idea of like, okay, what does it mean for me to use my gifts and to have impact on the kingdom of God? And so the next step is not just an individual understanding of a heart for disciple making, but now beginning to learn what that looks like and how God has uniquely gifted and equipped me to do that. And ultimately, the last part of this funnel is sending them, right? So you're actually sending them out to have impact even in the community. And one of the things that's interesting about this idea of the multiplication funnel is where people have a hard time with the multiplication funnel is there's less control, right? So in some sense, it's not necessarily like the worship, connect, serve programs in the church, but it's this individual's heart for disciple making, beginning to equip and learn what that means, and then ultimately sending them out. And so these are the two funnels that we talked about last week, and just like, what does it look like for us not to minimize one, but to work in both of these. And where funnel fusion gets really kind of fun to talk about is when we begin to think about the layering of these two funnels. So on one side, right? So on one side, you have this funnel that is the assimilation funnel, right? So here is assimilation funnel. And it's this natural idea of like, we're trying to progress people in, but then thinking about even the layering on top of that, the multiplication funnel. And this is where funnel fusion comes on, where you're beginning to look at saying, okay, is there a possibility of connecting even with people inside of this normal assimilation funnel, right? And you're beginning to give them a picture in the, worship, connect, serve, is you're giving them a picture of even ministry beyond that, where they begin to progress and to begin to move outward into this idea of multiplication. And where the conversation came about was last week, was really about how do we have both of those things together, right? How do we have, in some sense, think about getting people more connected, utilizing their gifts more, and at the same time, in the midst of that funnel, also having a picture of what does it look like to capture people, equip people, and ultimately release people into kingdom impact that might even go beyond the scope of our ministry, beyond the scope of our church, beyond the scope of what is under kind of our, control or oversight of programmatic ministry, into helping equip people to be missionaries where they're at. And so that was just a super fun conversation to be a part of here over the last several weeks. Last week, as we jumped into this idea of funnel fusion. And so for you, I would love to, hear about, like, what does it look like for you to think about how to think about progressing people in terms of connection, and really helping them serve and get closer in terms of your ministry, and at the same time, on top of that, layering another type of initiative that is really about sending people out, and where we begin to marry these things together. So that is one of the tools that we talked about last week. Like I said yesterday, that was probably a 2-hour conversation that we had. I think I just condensed it down to like 12 or 15 minutes or something like that. So if you have any questions, go ahead and drop those in the comment below. I'll get to those questions. If you want to hear more about our quarterly gatherings that are happening here in Austin, if you're interested in exploring if that's a good fit for you or not, we can definitely do that. We'd love to kind of share about what we're doing, some of our goals, the types of things, the type of leader that would be best served in that environment. So you can reach out to us and we can talk to you more about that as well. So that's it for today. We'll jump in tomorrow with another Facebook Live. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite tools, the Horizon Storyline, which is really about creating vision for your ministry, thinking long term and helping move forward. So we'll talk to you later. Have a good day, everybody. See ya.